Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Venkat or Dr. Chitra. Either way is fine. I am a neurologist and I work currently at Stanford University in California. And somebody had sent me a question as to why I'm a professor and not a surgeon or a doctor seeing patients. Well, guess what? I do both. So I teach medical students, I teach people who are in advanced levels of training after medical school. I teach a variety of residents and fellows, and I teach other doctors as well. So that's the professor part of me. But I also see patients, and I see patients who have neurological problems that are severe enough for them to come and get admitted into the hospital or the emergency room or the intensive care unit. In other words, I'm a little more specialized than a regular neurologist. It's a lot of training. I don't even want to tell you how many years I trained, but it's a lot of training. It's a very specialized training, particularly dealing with people who have strokes and brain trauma and bleeding in the brain. So that's what I do. I don't work in a lab. My research is what is called as clinical research, meaning when somebody comes in with a stroke, part of the effort is to try and find out, hey, their blood vessel is blocked, part of their brain is not getting adequate blood flow. What can we do to open up the blood vessel? Can we give a medication that breaks up the clot? Maybe. Or maybe the medication is not going to work and maybe we go in and pull the clot out. So those kinds of investigations is what I'm interested in doing. So that's the research that I do. All right. Okay. So that's a little bit about me. I'm not a surgeon, so I don't operate on the brain, although I do some procedures in the intensive care unit. But my neurosurgical colleagues help me to do the procedures, and after the procedures are done, then I would take care of them in the ICU. So that's a bit about me and how I got involved with the North-South Foundation is Brain Bee has been very interesting, and I think you kids are just amazing. And I want more of you to become neuroscientists and neurologists. So I want more people to join me in what I'm doing. So this is a great way to encourage and to give you information that this is a beautiful world of neuroscience, and it's exploded in the last 10 years. It's exploding. It's the fastest growing field in medicine. New discoveries are being made. New genes are being found out every year. I'll just give you a little example. So stroke, when I started my training many, many years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of therapies for stroke. People would have a stroke and then we would give them what is called a supportive care. But now we can go in and pull those clots out and people are literally walking out of the hospital. So these would not have been possible without research. And this is just an example of the explosion of therapies and drugs and very targeted genetic therapies that we have in all fields of neurology. So if you're interested in the Brain Bee, you're interested in neuroscience, you are in the right place. All right, so the next thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see, make this a little bigger and share with you some of the questions that were sent in. So we can use this as a discussion forum, and I see some questions coming in the chat as well. And please keep your questions in the chat and I'll answer them after I'm done with these slides. All right, so one of the questions that I found very interesting is this question that was sent in is, how does the brain differ when understanding something conceptually versus memorizing a fact? That's a fantastic question. Whoever put this in, kudos to you. And when we do learning, learning is obviously of several types. And I'll give you an example. Babies also learn, but they are not consciously learning. How do babies learn to recognize the faces of their parents or recognize a face as something different than that of their parent? And it's something called implicit learning or pattern recognition. So, for example, the babies realize, oh, if the face kind of has an association with a soothing voice, they have a high pitched voice, and they're coming close to me, and they don't, they look friendly, although they don't really know what friendly means. So they kind of associate some patterns. Maybe the eyes of the parents are wide eyed, they're smiling at you. So those are the patterns that they recognize. And by doing this, they learn. They're not consciously learning. They're not consciously saying, oh, this is the face of my parent. This is the face of a stranger. But instead, they are learning it by association. That's called pattern recognition. So this is called implicit learning. The same way when we grow up, we do certain things as simple motor skills. For example, if you take soccer and you're doing a soccer drill, you're like kicking the ball and you're passing it to somebody. They pass it back to you. You kick it, they pass it back to you. Kick it, pass it back to you. You do it a few times, it becomes a fairly simple motor skill. After the first couple of times, it's just repetition and it's a motor skill. So that's implicit learning. You're not putting a lot of thought into that. So this means that it's much easier to learn because you're not involving many, many parts of the brain and many circuits of the brain. So that's implicit learning. And when we learn something conceptually, and that's called concept learning, what we do is our brain has stored certain patterns in it. And when we are presented with a new fact or a new image or a new situation, what we do is our brain compares. Is there anything from my memory bank, for example, that resembles what is going on here? Somebody has your phone, has your Zoom on. Can somebody mute that, please? So they kind of compare the pattern that they have in their brain, in their memory bank, and then say, are there bits and pieces of it that I can extrapolate and I can apply to this? This is from my pre-knowledge, whatever I have stored. I'm abstracting or extrapolating whatever I have here to this. And then you kind of fill in the gaps. In other words, you're taking part of an old pattern and then you're creating a new pattern. Now, this sounds hard, right? This sounds like you got to do a lot more work to understand the concept because you're utilizing more circuits and more parts of the brain to create this new pattern. So that's why concept learning is hard. It's called active learning. It is undoubtedly much harder than implicit learning. But the good news is once you learn it, it's much harder to forget. And the reason for that is in trying to learn, you have activated many parts of the brain. You have activated many circuits. You're actively engaging these circuits. And these neurons and these synapses are saying, okay, I'm going to be active. I'm going to be active. I'm passing on this information. And you don't learn a concept just once. In order to learn a concept, for example, in, math or even neuroscience, you're going over that a few times or many times. In other words, you're activating the circuits over and over and over again. So that's active learning. It's harder to learn, but it is very, very hard to forget. Even if you come back 6 months later, once you see it, those parts of the brain, because you've activated these circuits multiple times, this have become consolidated in your memory. And we'll talk about memory in a minute. And so you're very easy to retrieve it from your memory and understand it. So that's concept learning versus implicit learning. So which do you think you want to have? Memorizing is going to help you for a very short period of time, just rote memorization. But when you actively learn, that is definitely going to help you retain the information for a much longer period of time. Any questions on that? If so, please put it in the chat. And for some reason, I can't even see the chat here. Ah, there we go. All right, the next one is, where does this concept learning occur? It happens in the hippocampus, and I'm sure by now all of you know where the hippocampus is and why it's named the hippocampus, right? Anybody wants to tell me in the chat where the hippocampus is? Can put it in the chat. Why is the hippocampus so called? It's the bottom brain. Yeah, it's in the base of the brain. That's right, it's the base of the brain in the temporal lobe. Good job. It is in the temporal lobe, and it is folded and it's hidden inside the temporal lobe. And it's named so, I believe, after a seahorse. That's why it's called the hippocampus. The hippus means kind of a horse, and it's thought to resemble that of a seahorse. Very good, guys. Temporal lobe. Yep. And in addition, there is a connection to what is called the prefrontal cortex, so the front part of the brain. But again, on the inside, just the medial side, so the inside is just not visible from the surface. And that's the medial prefrontal cortex connects with the hippocampus, which is again folded inside the temporal lobe. So that's where the concept learning is occurring. Very good. Now, when we learn, well, you might ask, like, what is the neuroscience basis of learning? Well, sounds fine what you're saying, but how does it actually learn? How do we learn? What are the structural changes and the chemical changes that are happening in the brain as we're doing it? And this is a term that you might have heard before. It's called synaptic plasticity. So you remember your synapses, you have one neuron that is connecting with another neuron via a synapse. So you have a presynaptic neuron and you have a postsynaptic neuron. And when the neuron is repeatedly stimulated, repeated stimulation, it can be any kind of stimulus, and neurons are generally, let's think about them as electrical circuits. So if you give repeated stimulation with electricity, or in this case, you're like learning a concept. You're like applying your mind, you're learning your concept. There are some chemical changes that happen, and eventually physical changes also happen in the synapses. So let's see what chemical changes occur. So there is increased release of this neurotransmitter called glutamate. So glutamate releases from the presynaptic neuron. It travels through the synaptic cleft and goes to the postsynaptic neuron. Now, in the postsynaptic membrane, there are two types. There's many types of channels, but there are two types of channels that we are interested in. The first one are the AMPA channels, and the second one is the NMDA channel. Normally, the NMDA channel is blocked by an ion called magnesium. The AMPA channel can be opened by a weak current. A little bit of glutamate will open up the AMPA channel. Once the AMPA channel opens, it allows sodium to come into the cell, and you know what that causes. That causes depolarization of the postsynaptic membrane. Now, if you have a little bit of glutamate released, only the AMPA channels are going to open. And as more and more and more glutamate gets into the synaptic cleft, it opens more and more of the AMPA channels. The AMPA channels are open for a longer period of time. More sodium gets into the postsynaptic membrane, it depolarizes. And this is the basis for what is called as early long-term potentiation. We'll talk about it in a minute, but LTP or early LTP is how we remember and recall something for a few hours. So let's say you crash learning before a test, right? You're crash learning before a test. The previous night, you're staying up late, you're like going over, let's say some words or some math problems. That is early LTP. That's going to consolidate. It's not going to consolidate your memory for a very long period of time. It's only going to serve you for the next few hours. So that's early LTP. Over time, this comes again with concept learning. So over time, as you activate the circuits over and over and over again, meaning revision, studying the same concepts over and over again. You're applying the concepts, you're activating the circuits. Now what happens is not only that the AMPA channels are open, but new types of protein are synthesized. Now what do these proteins do? They make new AMPA channels. They also make the AMPA channels that are inside the cell move up to the synaptic membrane. In addition, they also facilitate opening of the NMDA channels. Remember, they were blocked by the magnesium. Now they are telling magnesium, just go out. I want to open up the NMDA channels. So AMPA channels are open, NMDA channels are open. There's more AMPA channels that are being created. More AMPA channels are moving from the inside of the cell to the synaptic membrane. In addition, what happens is new dendritic spines form. So remember those dendrites, like the branches of a tree? Now you have more branches. Think about it, more branches are sprouting. Think about it, it's like spring, right? Like more branches are coming out. So these are the dendritic spines. And what do these dendrites do? These dendrites go and signal to other neighboring neurons. So now they are establishing newer connections. So newer circuits are being formed. And this is called late long-term potentiation. Now it is this LTP or late LTP that actually leads to memory consolidation. This is where the memory finally gets made and gets stored very securely in the hippocampus, from where you can retrieve it. So what is the short version of this? If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Meaning, if you don't keep engaging those dendrites and those neurons over and over again, those dendrites are going to become lazy. They're like, oh, well, XYZ doesn't need me. I'm not going to work. So you're going to eventually lose it. But if you keep using it, if you keep activating the circuit over and over again, then memory gets formed. So I hope that kind of differentiates. Implicit learning is easy learning. Concept learning is harder learning. But by doing concept learning, you're actually causing more LTP to occur because you're activating the circuits over and over again. And LTP is eventually what is responsible for memory consolidation in the hippocampus. So the circuit that is utilized is called Papes circuit. The Papes circuit is, it's a bit of a complicated circuit. And this circuit, let's see if I can move my marker. So this is a section of the brain whereby it's cut in half. So it's cut in half in the sagittal plane like this. So what you're seeing is not the outer surface of the brain. What you're seeing is the inside of the brain. And on the inside of the brain, this part, let's see if I can pull up an arrow or annotate. Let's see. Okay. So this part is the tip of the temporal lobe, or the front part of the temporal lobe. And this is the inside of the temporal lobe. Remember, what's on the inside of the temporal lobe? It's the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is right here. The hippocampus, all of this blue color that's here, that's the hippocampus. The hippocampus is folded on the inside or the medial side of the temporal lobe. Now this hippocampus connects with this structure, which I'll point to, that's called the thalamus. The thalamus is also a very, very deep structure. It's a paired structure, one on either side, and it's deep within the brain. It's pretty close to where the hippocampus is. Now, thalamus has a variety of functions, which we're not going to talk about today, but one of those functions is participating in the Papes circuit. Then from the thalamus, it goes to what is called the mammillary bodies. These mammillary bodies are, let's find a different marker. Okay, here we go. So that is the mammillary body. Now the mammillary bodies are, again, a pair of paired structures, and mammillary bodies are typically destroyed in one condition that you may or may not read in your IBB, but when you come to your senior brain B, you'll definitely read about it. This condition is called Wernicke's encephalopathy or Wernicke's-Korsakoff's psychosis. This happens to people who drink a lot of alcohol. They exhaust all their thiamine stores. So thiamine is a vitamin. It's B complex B1 vitamin. And when the thiamine stores are exhausted, the mammillary bodies degenerate and they don't function very well anymore. And these patients have trouble with their memory. So that's the mammillary body. And from there, it goes to the frontal cortex. So this part is the medial frontal cortex. So this is the PAPE circuit. So it involves the temporal lobe, involves the thalamus, involves the mammillary bodies, involves the frontal lobes. How do you activate the circuit? High frequency stimulation, consistent stimulation, studying, repeating, revising. This is how you consolidate your memories. And the neuroscience basis of this is the long-term potentiation that happens because more AMPA channels are open, more glutamate is released, more NMDA channels are open, and new dendritic spines are being formed. So that is the neuroscience basis of what we know as memory consolidation. So hopefully whoever asked the question, which is a great question, by the way, got me thinking again. And hopefully that explanation was understandable. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so the next question is, I don't know how to remove these from my slides, but the next question was on this condition. Anybody knows what this condition is? I got one answer there. Anybody else? Agreed, that's right. Oh, I hope you like Shreya. Yes, this is prosopagnosia. So prosopagnosia is a selective problem where you can't identify faces. So the question that somebody asked is, what exactly other than damage to the specific area causes prosopagnosia? And why is it that it's only facial patterns we aren't able to understand? What a beautiful question. So here the problem is what we call face agnosia. It is not an issue of blindness. The problem is not because your retina is not working. Your retina is working. It's the optic nerves are working. The pathways that are connecting the optic nerves all the way to the occipital lobe, which is the vision center, that's working too. So it is not an issue of perception of light or perception of an image. That is not the problem here at all. The problem is that you're not able to identify certain features of faces. It is true that it's selective for faces. However, people with prosopagnosia can also have trouble sometimes with object recognition, particularly the more complex objects. Similarly, they might have trouble recognizing words as well, complex words. So the common theme here is that it's not a simple outline. It's something that's more complex, such as faces for the most part, but other complex objects and words can also be difficult for them to recognize. Now, where is the part of the brain that helps in facial recognition? And we think it is on the right side, again, in the temporal lobe, in a part called the fusiform gyrus. And that is where we think that face recognition occurs. Now, the pathway of face recognition, it's a multi-step process. The first step in that is encoding or registering a face. The second is association of this registered image with what is called as face recognition units. So it's not just one part in the fusiform gyrus. You think of it as groups of cells. There are these multiple little units. So probably one recognizes, I'm giving an example. One recognizes the color of your eyes, another recognizes the shape of your nose, another recognizes the shape of your jaw. So there's multiple little units that recognize certain features of a face. And as you know, faces are very complex. They're complex not only because they have different features, but they have a lot of emotional variation from second to second. So these facial recognition units, there are many, many of these units that are scattered in the medial temporal lobe. And once these facial recognition units are activated, then each unit communicates with the adjacent unit. So for example, this unit is recognizing the eyes, this is recognizing the nose, this is recognizing something else, and they all join together and recognize a face. In other words, for complex things, such as a face or a complex object, you have many, many of these recognition units that then collaborate with one another and form a complete picture. So now it becomes easy to understand why is it most of the time that it's a trouble with recognizing features of the face. You can probably see an outline of the face, but you can't really see the specific features and identify the features of the face. And the problem is either, this is much rarer, the problem is either in the first step whereby the registration of the face never happens in the medial temporal lobe. So the face registration never even happens. So the first step in the pathway doesn't even happen. You might say, wow, that sounds really bad. That sounds, so these people can't recognize faces at all. That's true. There's about 2 to 3% of the population that have congenital prosopagnosia. They're born with this condition where they just cannot recognize faces. So you can see that if you have congenital prosopagnosia, it's going to be very hard for them to socially interact and to form social bonding and so on. Sometimes you can see this in autism spectrum disorders, such as Asperger's syndrome is one type on the autism spectrum disorders. But this congenital form is much rarer. The more common is the acquired form. And in the acquired form, at some point of time before whatever injury or insult happened to the face, they were able to recognize faces. They were able to encode, they were able to register. So it's, all of that has happened. But the problem that happens in acquired prosopagnosia is there's a disturbance in the connectivity of these face recognition units. So the different connections of these face recognition units are destroyed. And because of this, each unit is not communicating with the next unit. And why does this happen? What are some causes for why prosopagnosia occurs? Does anybody know? Name a few diseases that cause this problem. What are the things that can destroy the medial temporal lobe? And I'll scroll through your chat in the meanwhile. Any thoughts? Seizures, direct trauma. I like that one. Yes. Did you know that the temporal lobe is one of the most easily injured places in the brain in terms of brain trauma? So concussion is more often a transient phenomenon, but you could have actual destruction of these areas. Stroke is another big one. So strokes that can happen in the medial temporal lobe can cause it. There's another virus called herpes virus. Anybody heard of herpes viruses? These herpes viruses love the temporal lobe. They also destroy the temporal lobe. So these herpes virus, for whatever reason, they love to go and sit in the temporal lobe, and they also love to go sit in the frontal lobe. So what does the frontal and the temporal lobe connections do? Remember memory. So people who have herpes encephalitis, which is an inflammation of the brain, can end up with this. But The most common condition in which we see prosopagnosia is actually after a stroke, where you have a blood clot that obstructs the blood vessel that gives, normal blood flow to this area of the brain. Why does it affect only the temporal lobe in terms of herpes viruses? Well, bad herpes viruses can affect any part of the brain, but they seem to have a predisposition to the neurons that are in the temporal lobe, and we don't exactly know why that is. That's right, Sahana. Hemorrhages can also happen in the temporal lobe. So these are the most common reasons why prosopagnosia occurs in an acquired form. Now, in addition to, somebody had a question earlier about amnesia. Let me just scroll back and look at that one. Does this have anything to do with memory loss? So Charvi asked that question, and Charvi is right on the money. Yep, it's the temporal lobe. So oftentimes we find that if you have a stroke or you have a brain trauma, it's rare that it's only that they have prosopagnosia. They often have other features, including memory difficulty. They can have what is called as field defect, meaning they somehow cannot see objects on one part of their visual field. So maybe the top half of the visual field or the bottom half of the visual field. In addition, they have trouble recognizing colors. They also get lost in space, so spatial disorientation. And this is a right hemispheric problem. The right hemisphere is very important for spatial disorientation. So maybe this person is getting into a car and trying to drive, they get completely lost. Some people get lost in your own home. They're trying to find their way to the bathroom and they forget where to find their way to the bathroom. So it also follows that some people with Alzheimer's disease, which ends up involving the parietal and the temporal lobes, can also have prosopagnosia. Fortunately, there is, so there was a question from Raja Puri, can Alzheimer's cause prosopagnosia? In some instances, it absolutely can. So great question, guys, and great discussion on that. So that is prosopagnosia. Now we shall go on to the next question that came through, which is about sleep and dreaming. What a lovely question. Everybody is interested in it, right? So I'm not sure if Aditi has gone over the stages of sleep, but if she has, this would be a quick sort of revision about stages of sleep. So there are two big stages of sleep or types of sleep that we talk about. So one is called let's go here, there's a non-REM sleep, and the second one is a REM sleep. So the non-REM is a non-rapid eye movement sleep. So it is a rapid eye movement that distinguishes the two big types of sleep. The other term for the non-REM sleep is called a slow wave sleep. And then you have the rapid eye movement or the REM sleep. Now, when we go to sleep, and here it beautifully shows you how this progresses. So the yellow line here is where you're awake. So you're slowly becoming drowsy and you start sinking into stage 1 sleep, where you start seeing alpha waves where you're awake, but you're resting. Your eyes are simply closed. You're not really actively focusing on something. You're not concentrating on any particular thought or subject or task. You just have your eyes closed, but you haven't fallen asleep quite yet. Then you go to the beta waves. You go to stage 1 where you have the alpha waves, and then slowly and slowly and slowly, these waves start slowing down as you go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 or to stage 4. So you quickly go from the alpha waves to what is called the theta and the delta waves. These are the slowest waves. We don't see beta waves. The beta waves are when you're right now, if I did an EEG or electroencephalogram of your brain, I'm going to see a lot of beta waves because you're actively engaged in something, you're receiving sensory stimulation in the form of these pictures, in the form of my voice, So you're actively engaged in this. So your EEG will be all beta waves. But as you're getting to sleep, to stage 1, to stage 2, to stage 3, or stage 4, then our EEG waves start slowing down. They become bigger in amplitude, but slower in frequency. So that is called your deep sleep or your delta sleep. So let's take a look here at this cartoon, and this will help us understand where dreams occur and why we can remember some dreams and we can't really remember other dreams. So in the non-REM stage 1, it is your transition period, and it lasts about 5 to 10 minutes. The non-REM stage 2, it's like, think about your body is going into hibernation mode. Your body temperature drops, your heart rate begins to slow down, and you have these clusters of waves that are called sleep spindles. So whoever was reading the EEG 100 years ago thought they looked like a spindle, so they called them as sleep spindles. And then you go into your stage 3, which is even sort of deeper relaxation. Everything really, really, really slows down. You go to stage 3 and stage 4 sleep. That's when your whole body is at rest. So you reach this bottommost, so stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3 and 4 are your deep sleeps. And then you re-emerge from it and you have your REM sleep. So what happens in REM? REM happens about every 90 minutes, right from the time you get to go to sleep. So in REM sleep, so what typically happens is your eyes start moving pretty rapidly, but the rest of your body is still relaxed and it doesn't move. But your eyes are moving pretty rapidly. If you guys have had younger siblings at home, or you watch a young baby, if you watch the baby, like close your eyes and you're trying to go to sleep, their REM sleep occurs much faster than that. They don't wait 90 minutes to go into REM sleep. Their REM sleep occurs within like 20, 30 minutes, very, very fast. And so you can see your eyes are closed, but your eyes are bouncing back and forth. Now, the brain is actually in a very active, sort of alert stage. And this stage is characterized by rapid eye movements, which is why we call it as a REM sleep. Now, let me switch gears here and tell you that the first half, if you think about 8 hours of sleep, your first half of your sleep is predominantly this deep, restful sleep. If you never go down to stage 3 and 4, you're not going to have a deep, restful sleep. And a lot of the monoamines, which are serotonin and norepinephrine, are released during this time and during the non-REM sleep. Every 90 minutes, the REM sleep pops up, stays for 10, 15 minutes, and then again, you go all the way back down into your non-REM sleep. The second half of the sleep cycle, as is shown in this figure here, you have less and less of this deep sleep, you have more and more of your REM sleep in the second half of your night. And during that time, why does this switch occurs? The brain kind of switches gear from the monoamines. There's less monoamines being produced. There's more acetylcholine being produced. It just flips. And during this time, with acetylcholine, you do have some learning and consolidation. You have some integration of your old memories with new memories and hippocampus. In other words, what is actually this dreaming? What is a dream? A dream is basically your brain is actively synthesizing whatever happened that particular day or the last few days. It's a way for the brain to kind of relive that experience and integrate that experience with maybe something you already have in your hippocampus. That's a dream. So it's an integration of your new experiences with the old experiences. Now, so that's actually, we call it a dream, but the hippocampus and the brain are actively working to engage and to consolidate and to take in these new experiences you've had and put them in the box of the hippocampus. Now you might ask, like, why when I wake up, sometimes I remember what I dreamt and other times I don't remember. If you are in a very, very deep sleep stage and you're not yet at the alert stage, it's much harder to remember your dreams. But you do dream. You dream both in non-REM sleep and you dream in REM sleep. You dream in both. But the types of memory consolidation that happens in each stage is very different. In non-REM sleep, it is a deep sleep where you have episodic memory formation. Episodic memory is let's say, you felt you achieved something or you had an event. Now you're going to associate that with, it's an episode, what time it happened, under what circumstances it happened. You're going to associate the time, the circumstances, and then form that memory. So that's called episodic memory. On the other hand, REM sleep, the REM is a bizarre, fragmented memory. So it can be absolutely scary nightmares, not the classic nightmares, but these are, very disjointed, discombobulated, doesn't make sense kind of dreams. Like all of a sudden you're running down the street and a tiger's chasing you, right? Those kinds of dreams occur in REM sleep. Now, there's a lot of emotional overlay to this REM sleep. So it can be fear, it can be joy, it can be disgust, it can be anger, whatever it is, it's coming in the REM sleep. Why is that? Because of cortisol. So cortisol, remember, it's one of the hormones in addition to adrenaline that's involved in sort of this protective response, fight, flight, etc. So cortisol happens to peak during the morning time, which is when your REM sleep is also, there's a lot of REM sleep in the morning. So when you have high cortisol, there are more fragmented emotional dreams. Cortisol doesn't actually let you have very consolidated episodic memory. All this memory is like super fragmented, but what cortisol does is it adds the emotional context to this. So if you ask people, do you remember your dreams? It depends on which dreams or sleep state they actually woke up from. If you woke up from a REM sleep, you're much more likely to remember your dream versus if you woke up from a non-REM sleep. Well, how do you know which state you woke up from? Does anybody know how you can say? And I bet you guys have woken up from either one. Any thoughts on how you can say if you're waking up from a REM sleep or a non-REM sleep?
I have a question.
Yep.
Oh yeah, can I answer?
Yes. Somebody unmuted themselves. Introduce yourself and answer.
Okay, so when you're sleeping in REM, because if you're sleeping in REM, I think you can understand what someone's saying, or if you're either sleeping in NREM or or REM, I'm not sure which, and you understand what someone is saying, then you know that it's either one of those. I'm not sure which though.
Well, you're kind of awake when you're in REM sleep. You're not exactly in deep sleep, which is different than REM sleep. Because when you're sleepwalking and if someone obeys to what someone's saying, that means you're basically in REM sleep, but also really, really close to being awake.
I see where you guys are going. So what you're saying is, if I pull this one up, if I'm near the top, somewhere very close to the awake state, then I'm going to remember my dreams much more. And if somebody wakes me up from there, then I probably remember. Well, you can also be awoken from a non-REM stage 1. You're just falling asleep, right? You're just falling asleep. So the way to know which state you actually woke up from is how refreshed you feel. If you wake up from REM, it means that you've already gone through at least one cycle of deep sleep. At least one cycle of deep sleep you've gone through. So your brain has had a chance to relax, rest, and then come back up. But on the other hand, if you wake somebody up from deep sleep, they're going to feel like super groggy, fuzzy. So think about how you woke up in the morning. If you feel really alert and fresh, that means you're pretty much woken up from a REM sleep and not from a deep sleep. But sometimes you take a nap in the afternoon and your body is just trying to get to the deep sleep, and then somebody wakes you up. Now you're not going to feel refreshed at all. So that's one way to know which stage you woke up from. And of course, if somebody was observing you and looking at your eye movements bouncing back and forth, that's a good way to know where you woke up from. Now, when you are in REM sleep, you remember about 90% of your dreams, and when you're in non-REM sleep, you remember about 50% of your dreams.
Can you wake up by yourself in like stage 3 and 4? Like wake up by yourself?
No, you can't. No, you can't. No. Your mom says that you should sleep in multiples of 45 minutes. How long is a typical sleep cycle? So the typical sleep cycle varies with age. So for babies, remember I said it's much shorter sleep cycles. When you talk about a sleep cycle, it's going from stage 1, 2, 3, 4, back up to 3, 2, 1, REM. So that whole thing is one cycle. So for adults, in order to reach your REM sleep, it's 90 minutes or so. So your whole sleep cycle is about 90, 100 minutes for an adult. But for kids, it's much less. So depends on how old you are. Your mom's probably right, because that whole cycle is going to be only 45 minutes, 50 minutes, depending on how young you are. But the closer you become to being a teenager, you're going to get into this 90-minute cycle. So is the concept of power nap really helpful? Well, it depends on if you've allowed your body go all the way down into stage 4. If you've gone to stage 4 and you're trying to wake up from stage 4, that's a problem, because you're going to feel very groggy and not very refreshed. But if you've gone only from stage 1 to stage 2, you're still pretty close to the top. Your brain's gotten some rest, and then you wake up. Does it matter if you sleep in the afternoon, morning, or night? Well, our body has a circadian rhythm, right? So think about the circadian is about 23.5 hours or so. It's not exactly 24 hours, but the circadian rhythm is built into our body, and it's based on the melatonin that's released from the pineal gland, and you get cues from the light that's outside. So when you're, let's say, traveling to India, right? You're on a flight, you have no cue whatsoever as to what is night, what is day. It's all lights in the cabin. Whenever they turn off the lights, that's night for you. So your brain gets obviously confused, and that's what we call as jet lag. So does it matter if you sleep in the afternoon, morning, or night? Yes, it does, because you are going to have to try to mirror your circadian cycle. Now you might ask, can I reset my circadian cycle so that I am sleeping in the day and awake at night? That's what night shift workers do, because these night shift workers, they are being exposed to light when? At night, when they go to the hospital and work, or when they go to the factory and work. So their circadian cycle becomes reset. For them, whenever there's light, that is day for them. So unless we are, in that sort of situation, I would say, using your body's time clock. So wake up when it's light outside, and then shut down when it is dark. Now in winter, it's a little difficult, but I'm talking about like a big, normal, summery day. Okay.
I've always wondered this. What if you've been like sleeping in the evening for like 3 hours and your body needs at least 8 hours to sleep? Would you just need like 5 minutes to sleep?
Sorry, there was some noise in between. So could you repeat your question again?
So let's say you sleep 3 hours in the evening, like in the afternoon, and your body needs at least 8 hours of sleep. Would you just need 5 minutes, or would you still need that 8 hours of sleep?
So first of all, it's a myth that everybody needs 8 hours of sleep. Some people need only 6 hours of sleep, and others need 10 hours of sleep. So each person's body requires a different amount of sleep. But there's nothing called a sleep catch up. So let's say you're sleeping for 5 hours today. You have a test coming up, so you're staying up late, you're cramming, and then you're like, once the test is over, I'm going to catch up on my sleep. Unfortunately, the body doesn't let you do that. It doesn't work that way. So those 5 hours, let's say your body requires 8 hours to sleep, and you slept only for 5 hours, that 3 hours is called a sleep debt. You can't repay that debt. It's not like you take a credit card loan and then you pay it back. This debt cannot be repaid, which is why even when you're studying, even when you have a test coming up, it's important to maintain the same sort of sleep cycle. So you can't do catch up, you can't do play up with it. Does that make sense? Can't do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
I have a
All
question.
right. Yep, go ahead.
Is it harmful for people to work for night shifts?
Initially, yes. Initially, it is harmful. It's harmful because you are in the phase of trying to reset your circadian clock. But once you're reset, that and they continue, that's a key thing. If you keep bouncing back between a night shift and a day shift, your circadian clock is going to have to readjust itself every few days or every few weeks, and that's not good at all. Why do we need this, deep sleep? It's again for memory consolidation, memory formation, consolidation, and learning. So when you keep bouncing back and forth between two circadian cycles, that part of what your brain needs to, what your brain needs, the time it needs for consolidating and forming the memories is not there. But if somebody's a night shift worker and they always remain as a night shift worker, I have nurses who work only the night shift. For them, their day is the night and they're fine. So that's how they function. Except it becomes a little difficult for social interactions, right? So during the day, when the rest of the world is awake and is interacting, these folks are sleeping. So there is a price that you're going to pay in terms of your social interaction and development.
So if you have like a person who works, let's say 3 days and night shift, and then they come back, they don't have to work anymore for that week, and then they have to change their circadian rhythm to day shift, that would pose problems for them?
Yes, it will. It will pose problems for them. That's correct.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do people wake up on their own sometimes?
Remember that little line here, the yellow line? So the brain goes through these cycles, and as you progress towards what your body has determined that's the amount of sleep that you need, they kind of pop back up. So the deep sleep becomes shorter and shorter as the time of how long you've slept progresses. And let's say your body needs 8 hours. As you're coming close to 8 hour, then it just pops back up. So that's again part of the circadian, rhythm and the sleep cycle, the sleep regulation.
Could it also?
But a lot of times it also depends on external cues. So depending on whether there's noise, whether there's light outside, so your brain is perceiving all of these. And towards the second half of the night, because you're in less and less of deep sleep, your brain is now getting all the sensory stimulation and it responds to it and it wakes up. I think I'll take 5 more minutes to answer any questions.
Okay, so I just thought of this now. So you said that when we dream, we either have like dreams about like completely random things, or it's like replaying the day. What if you have a dream about like a long time, like a memory, I guess?
You mean something that happened a long time ago?
Yeah.
So you're asking,
like, would that
I
be
think
REM?
what you're asking is, no. So if you're like replaying something from a long time ago, that long time ago must have already gotten into your hippocampus and in your memory. And that's episodic memory, which means it formed in your non-REM sleep at some point of time, whenever that happened, and it's already put in your bank. So when you're remembering or recalling something from a long time ago, you're basically pulling it out from your hippocampus and you're comparing with something else that happened today. So that long-term ago is episodic memory that's already been put in the hippocampus so many days ago, many years ago, when you were in non-REM sleep, not REM sleep, non-REM sleep.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Can you like by chance continue your dream? Let's say you had a dream one day and then the next day you wanted to continue that dream. Because sometimes that happens to me. I don't know why. Like
So
you all
remember,
of a sudden
dream is
just...
another form of learning. It's also another form of learning. So if you're actively engaged in the same thing, then yes, you can certainly quote unquote continue your dream, but it's not really continuing your dream. You're continuing that learning process. Your dreams are a way to learn and make new memories and put it in your memory box. But you cannot force your brain to say, like, I need to dream about winning the brain bee today. No, that doesn't work. But if you're studying for your brain bee, and if you're studying that particular day, you study the previous day, then it sounds like it's a continuation of your dream because you're making all of those deep connections and you're putting it back in.
So you basically have to like work toward that dream.
Yes, that's right. Yes, you have to work towards it. At some level, yeah, you have to work towards it.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Is it true that studying in early hours of the morning is more effective than like the middle of the day?
I don't think so. I don't think so. So one part of it is when you have had a good night's sleep, meaning you have fulfilled your sleep quota for that day, right? You've fulfilled, let's say you have an 8-hour quota, you have fulfilled your 8-hour quota. Your brain is pretty rested, it's relaxed, cortisol is up. You finished your deep sleeps, you're now in REM sleep, you've come up. So it's easier to start learning and to learn during that time. But I don't think necessarily early versus middle of the day versus late night makes a difference. What makes a difference is if your body has fulfilled your sleep quota the previous day and you're not tired or exhausted from it.
Okay. Is there a way to like modify how much? Is there a way to modify your sleep quota?
Is there a way to modify? Well, our sleep quota is going to change with age. As we become older, we're going to need less and less sleep. Older as in you kids, right? Like when you were 7 years old, you needed more sleep. When you're 13, you're going to need less sleep. When you're an adult, you're going to need even lesser sleep. And then you're stable for some period of time. And then as you become older again, the amount of sleep that you need also goes down. But can you modify the amount of sleep that your body needs? In other words, can you train your brain to like sleep less? The way you can to some degree, not to a whole lot, but you can do a little bit, you can do it. And that is by making sure that your brain has had a chance to go all the way down to non-REM sleep and come back up. So you have to fulfill the deep sleep quota part of it. And somebody had a question about meditation. What does meditation do? Meditation does this exactly. It slows your brain waves down. Which phase of sleep does our brain wave slow? It's a non-REM sleep, right? In stage 3 and stage 4. So by doing meditation, you're training your brain to kind of relax and go quick into, without spending too much time in stage 1 and stage 2, you're training your brain to go down into a deep sleep state quicker and stay in that sleep state. So that's the way you can train your brain, but you can't, change your sleep quota from 8 hours to 5 hours. That's not possible. Could probably change it from 8 to maybe 7 or 7.5, but it's unlikely you're going to be able to change it to 5 hours.
Wait, why is that when you age, like whenever you get older, you need less sleep? Like, why is that?
It's a very complex interplay of all the hormonal changes that are going on in the body. That's too complicated to explain here, sorry. But it's because the underlying hormones are all changing.
Okay.
Somebody asked, is that why older siblings often wake up early on the weekends? Yep, but I have 2 boys and my older one sleeps late on the weekends because I don't know when he goes to sleep at night. Yeah.
Isn't that like why in movies they say, oh, the older ones are like usual people, they say that the older ones can sleep later than the younger ones?
That's probably because you're staying up late as well. Right?
Or
you're probably like sneaking something under the covers and you're sleeping,
I think we are going over, taking your time now. I'm wondering if anybody has last minute questions before
there's one question.
I have a question too.
Okay, very quick. That will be the last. Okay.
So what parts of the brain is affected by ALS?
Oh yeah, that question popped up. So ALS is interestingly mostly affects the spinal cord. It's a disease of the motor neurons in the spinal cord. So only a few people get brain problems with ALS. The majority of them don't. So their arms and their legs, they don't work because the muscles are all weak and they're wasted away, but they're very sharp in your brain. They can think, they can speak, they can do all of that. If in those people, the brain is affected, it turns out to be the frontal and the temporal lobes again. But it is much rarer to see that. ALS mostly affects the muscles and the rest of the body. And I just want to answer one last question. So what is your advice for being successful on the medical path? I would say 5 things to consider. So the first is to determine if you're actually interested in it. Not because your parents are pushing you into it, not because you know, you want to try it and see. It is a long path. It's a commitment. So you explore. This is the time to explore, which is why you're doing the Brain Bee. You're doing it. You're finding out, hey, is this something that excites me, that really interests me? And if you're interested and excited about learning all this cool stuff about the brain, yep, that's number 1, is fulfilled. Number 2, it requires long hours of work and training, many, many, many years. Your fellow classmates who might decide to do something else, they would be done with their training much earlier than you are going to finish your training. So are you in it for the long haul? So that's the second one. Third, I would say the most important one is you have to be a constant learner. I learn every single day. I learned so much from all of you today, from all of these questions you asked me. I'm learning every single day. So do you have the mentality of learning every single day? And the answer is yes, that's number 3. Fourth is what is called as commitment. So commitment, so not only interest, not only the interest for learning, but are you committed to a lot of sacrifices go into it? A lot of personal sacrifices. Your friends are, let's say, you know, you're in your 20s, you're in your 25, your friends are out going and having a party while you're going to the hospital and working. Are you willing to make those sacrifices? And depending on which particular field in medicine you're going to go to, for example, if you're going to be a surgeon, you're going to be called in at all times of the night and day. So are you willing to make those sacrifices? So, and the last one for being successful is, you know, finding and speaking with somebody who's already been through this path. Medicine has changed a lot and it keeps changing a lot. And so you might want to shadow somebody. You might want to hang out with somebody who has done this and see, you know, is this kind of lifestyle I like? Whatever they're doing, am I interested in? Do I find it exciting? Do I find it interesting? So not just looking at videos, not just looking at books, not only reading about it, but actually hanging out, speaking to somebody who's done through this and see if that is something you can envision for yourself in the future. So if you do these 5 things, you're going to be pretty successful.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra. I think you have given the first insight into the last item. So you have given them a little bit of a feel for it. Appreciate it very much. Okay. Thank you. And for those of you who have other questions, please send it by email or post it and we will follow it. We've been very fortunate and I have to admit that you are an inspiration for everyone. Thank you.